Hey everybody, it's Dr. Wood, and today we're talking about putting it all together. So, what do we do now? So, you've got your proposal done, you have your citations, you've been reviewing your articles, hopefully, and hopefully you've been writing because a draft is now due to your peer reviewer. So, what do we do now, right? Remember when you're going about writing your paper and going over the structure and things like that? With the different parts, different sections of it, I'll kind of try to address these and some things that I think are important for you to hear. Some maybe the pitfalls that I've seen students make in the past and things like that. So first off, your abstract, do this last. Even though it's the first thing in your paper, it's basically a summary of what your actual paper is. So if you know what the paper is, then you can more easily write down the abbreviated form of that. So save that for last. It's the least important part of the entire thing, if we're all being quite honest. But still necessary because, people like to read the abstracts to see if they want to read more about your paper. Then getting into the introduction, this is again where you're stating your problem. This is where you're trying to entice people to see why this is important and why they need to read your paper. State, things about the epidemiology, say how many people this is affecting or how much money it's costing the government to pay for this, and things like that. So state the problem, why it's important, and then what do you hope to show with your particular paper. Like, what are you hoping to show by the end of this, and how you're going to do that, right? So then in this section you will also talk about how you're going to tackle that problem. So include your methods, talk about how, okay, we did a literature search using PubMed, using these search terms to find articles pertaining to this problem, right? Or we went and whatever your method was, that's what you want to include in that introduction section. Next, getting into the body of the paper itself. Remember, this is where you're reviewing the literature. One of the big things that I find students do pretty frequently is they'll say, okay, X was better than Y. Okay, well, that's great, but like, how much better? Were there percentages involved? Was it statistically significant? Was it clinically significant? These are things that I want to see there, right? So I want to see actual facts and figures. I want to see, things to back up what you're saying. You can't just say it and I take it at face value because with every bit of research you read, like, you trust but verify, right? So this is why you want to back up what you're saying. Talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the research. You can say, wow, they found these results, but there's only 30 patients involved. When we looked at a larger study that had 100 patients, they found this. That can be really handy in order to help kind of fully and thoroughly go through the topic to make sure you kind of uncover every stone, as it were. And again, write it so that the reader can come to their own conclusions. It's easy when you have an idea of what the results already are to try to write it such that you're trying to convince the reader of one thing or another. But just lay the facts out. This is not like a debate where you're trying to win someone over to your side. You're doing the research, you're stating the facts, and based off of that, they should be able to come to their own conclusions. They'll read your conclusions to see if it matches up, but they should be able to just off of the body of the paper itself. Next, getting into the discussion, this is where you want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the review. You can say, well, there's really not a lot of articles out there about this topic because it's relatively new, or it is, say, in an orphan disease state where there's just not many people that acquire this disease. Things like that. You also want to include like future avenues of research. Like, what would you like to see in the future? Say, what kind of studies should they do in order to better answer your question from the very beginning, right? And then you also want to talk about how it's going to impact your future practice. So since you're all going to be PAs, I want you to think about how it's going to affect people working in the PA profession, right? So if you're writing about, say, for instance, types of skin cancer, you want to talk about how this may affect other people practicing in dermatology, because that was most likely going to be your audience for that paper should you publish it, right? And then finally, in the conclusion, sum up all of your takeaway points for of the review for the reader. Basically say, like, hey, these are the bullet points, these are the 3 things we really found from this, and just put a nice bow on it, right? Kind of tie it all up and say, okay, here's what we found, boom, kind of done, right? In terms of references, they should be in the order that they were cited in the text. And so if you're, say, writing your introduction, like the first thing you cite should be number 1, 2, 3, and so on. And that's how it should be listed. It's not alphabetical, which you'll typically see. Oftentimes I would rather you oversight than under, right? And so what I mean by that is if you say, the pathophysiology of PCOS is blah, you should have a reference for that, right? So anytime you're stating a fact, you want to have something that's backing that up. Now, does that mean every single sentence needs a reference? No. If you're using one reference for, say, a paragraph or several sentences, and they're all coming from the same thing, just do it at the end there, right? That doesn't mean I want to see like 2 pages worth of stuff and then one citation at the end. That doesn't really work. But there should be at least one per paragraph, most likely, if not more, right? And so if you're switching around between citations within a paragraph, then you'd obviously cite it after each one, each idea has been expressed. And remember, we're using the AMA formatting, so use the superscripted numbers that will come after the period. And then make sure that you're following that. I will know because you can kind of tell by sight after a while if it's in the right format or not. So just make sure you do that. Make sure some people will frequently do like APA citations, or they actually will put like the name of the authors in parentheses or the year in parentheses when citing. You don't need to do that. You just need to put the number, the superscripted number, and then they can follow that up in the actual bibliography at the end. So yeah, so make sure you oversight rather than under, and back up your facts. So here's some tips that I think are important when you're writing your paper. These are things I've either seen students do or things that I think that I've learned as I've been writing in medical things. So first off, in general, tend to shoot for overwriting first and then go back through and cut things down, kind of a slash and burn sort of approach. I tend to find that by doing that, you have a 10-page minimum, but that should be the minimum, right? So write more than that, and then you can cut and slash things down as appropriate. And you'll tend to find that when you're initially kind of writing, that kind of stream of consciousness when you're writing is not the most succinct way to actually have worded things, right? So you can go back there and be like, wow, that was way too wordy. I can cut that down for sure, from say 25 words to 15. And to go along with that, make sure you're being thorough, but also be concise. People tend to want to be a little more verbose than they really should be on these types of things, and they'll use, again, 25 words when 10 might have done just fine, right? So thorough but concise. Remain objective. You don't want to put a whole lot of subjective opinions on these sort of things. Just say what the facts were and what that supports in terms of a conclusion, right? So try to remain objective as possible, right? And again, don't use any first person language. Don't say, I'm going to be researching this. Just say, this research will look at blah, 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 so don't use any first person language. It's a tendency a lot of people who've never done this type of writing before will have. So to go along with talking about your style in your prose, make sure, in an effort to sound intelligent, some people like to use what I call $5 words when a quarter will have done. What I mean by that is that they will try to get the thesaurus out and try to use the most complicated word or the most syllables they can, when you could have just said it much more simply, right? So there's a place and time for that, but frequently you'll either find that people will think you're trying too hard with the language you're picking, or people end up using words incorrectly, and then that makes you look even sillier. So just keep it simple. No reason to overcomplicate things. And then finally, make sure you spell check everything. Not everything is going to be caught by Word at a bare minimum or at the baseline, because it doesn't pick up a lot of medical terminology, right? So because of that, you're going to find that things can be missed, or you may have words that are misspelled but they're a correct word. So for instance, if you misspelled something and turned into a different word as correctly spelled, it won't catch that. So you need to actually go through and read your work to make sure that everything was spelled correctly. That's the actual word that you wanted to use. So that's it for this section. Hopefully you've gotten a few tips out of this in order to help you put everything together. And if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.